Eric, welcome to Coventry Confidential. As we were just talking before we really started recording, I was asking exactly your title. And just as anybody coming into this cold, we're going to be talking about conservation in the community in Coventry and maybe bigger. But let's get an overview of exactly, I guess, your titles, and then let's go from there. So what is your role in Coventry right now? In involvement in conservation of the lands of Coventry?
Well, first of all, Francis, thanks for inviting me on. Glad to have this opportunity to talk a little bit about conservation and join in some of your other episodes of your podcasts.
Thank you.
Help
Thanks.
explain to people about what's going on in Coventry, especially volunteers. As far as my role in conservation or how I've been involved, I have a lot of academic and personal and professional background in land and water conservation, going back several decades. And when I moved into Coventry back in for full time in 1988, within a couple of years, actually, I joined the Advisory Land Use Commission, known as the Conservation Commission, which had been established actually back in the 1960s. And I thought, and I did for almost 10 years, provide opportunities for reviewing natural resource issues of all different kinds and have the ability to advise land use staff, other boards and agencies, and even the town council on matters of conservation issues. We can talk about some more details of that later on. That evolved over time with my role, slightly broader and a little bit more focused on inter-community conservation, helping to establish a nonprofit group called the Willimantic River Alliance, which were 13 towns following the Willimantic River from Stafford to Willimantic. And we had a good run for almost 2 decades as an advisory group that looked at watershed issues and support and advocacy. And Coventry was right in the smack of geographically that watershed area. So it made a lot of sense to kind of help bridge local interest and concerns about conservation with the Willimantic River Alliance so that I could communicate with a bunch of other towns. And then most recently, I'll mention briefly, for the last several years, I was asked and appointed by the town council to sit on the advisory group that's really now a subcommittee of Conservation Commission. We're calling ourselves the Protected Spaces Stewardship Committee, which is a big mouthful. Some people call us the Open Space Group or the Trails Group. And our charge from the town council is to help facilitate the access and the enhancement of publicly accessible town open spaces throughout the community. Primarily, we're doing that by developing or enhancing or maintaining trails, pedestrian walking trails, and other access sites throughout the town. We also advise conservation, land use office, inland wetlands, and we work cooperatively with several town departments, including Public Works, Police Department, Land Use, Parks and Recreation, on matters that fall more in their authorities or their jurisdictions. But as I'll point out later on, the cooperative effort has really helped to extend some of our limited but efficient resources we have in town by utilizing some volunteers to kind of fill in gaps and keep eyes on the ground, so to speak, which has been very helpful over the years.
No, this is all, everything that you do and everything, like, let's say the Conservation Commission does, everything is volunteer. Is that correct?
That's correct, right. Yeah, all this work that I'm referring to is certainly the advisory committees like the land use boards in town, Conservation Commission, and subcommittees like my Protected Spaces Committee and another one that focuses on Coventry Lake, among others. These are all volunteer-based, and with almost no exceptions, they're all appointed by town council or the chief elected officers and management of the town.
And do you need any kind of training to be even considered, or do you just need to volunteer and the commissions and groups will find a spot for you? Just, I mean, I'm just wondering, if anybody's interested in doing this, they don't have to be worried about, well, I'm just coming from a completely different, focus in life, but I still believe in wanting to help out the community when it comes to this. All they have to do is sign up. Is that correct? Because I know you have a great deal of background in conservation.
Yeah,
So,
you would be. It's a very good question. You'd be quite amazed, and I'm constantly amazed, even after living here since the mid to late '80s, of the incredible talent and skill pool in this community. Some of it's academic based, and some of them are professionally involved in land and water conservation. Um, I will say on equal footing, if not even more so, private landowners, some of whom are part of multi-generational um, families in this community have an amazing wealth, knowledge, and skill sets themselves. And it's really been a combination of those folks that I've been privileged to work with, as well as the professional staff in the town and some of the consultants and other agencies that the town works with. But really, to get to your question, with few exceptions, you really don't have to have the full resume that you might think that might be required for some of this. Experience can help, and that can show up in many ways. What I will say is for most of the major land use agencies in town, where the town council has an authority to appoint members, they will do an interview for prospective candidates who apply to ask to be appointed. And during those interviews, people from the council may ask questions about experiences or skill sets. And again, give wide deference to the abilities, some of which will be academic, some of which will be on the ground backyard work, some of which will be the fact that people can tie history, culture, and natural resources together, all of which, as we're going to talk later on, really are part of the land conservation aspects that I'm involved with here in Coventry.
I see here that there's 2,000 acres of protected space in Coventry. And how, seeing that there's 2,000 acres of protected space in Coventry, how big is Coventry? And does the Commission sort of deal with not only the 2,000 acres of protected space, but Coventry as a whole? How do you guys look at Coventry when you're starting to do your job and talk about um, open space and conservation?
So the town of Coventry geographically is actually one of the larger communities, municipalities in the state of Connecticut. It's pretty wide reaching. Any of you who have been up in the northwest corner by the Bolton Town line or Town line and say Cedar Swamp Road and driven all the way down to Flanders River Road or Kings Road down the southeast corner of the town, it takes a while actually to travel through this town. And that's if you're on a vehicle or a bike or something like that, let alone walking. So it is geographically, it's a big area. We actually have three significant rivers in Coventry: the Willimantic, the Hop, and the Skunkamog River. We actually have portions or full parts of three lakes, some of which might surprise Coventry residents. We have Coventry Lake, which is well known by hopefully almost everybody in the community. The river impoundment along the Willimantic River, called Eagleville Lake or Eagleville Pond, is a river impoundment that's actually split in half between Mansfield and Coventry. We can access that off of Stonehouse Road or Pine Lake Shores Drive. And then the third lake actually is a small lake called Upper Bolton Lake, which if you travel off of Cedar Swamp Road in the northwest corner of town, it's the uppermost of the three lakes of the Bolton Lake Range. Most people are familiar with lower and middle Bolton lakes. But I point those out as examples of water-based natural resources in the community, and they're very different and they're spread out geographically through the whole area. Then, of course, we have, as you mentioned, a lot of areas on land that are set aside and are what we call dedicated for open space protection or conservation preservation values. And those values have been articulated by the community more than a few different times during our every 10-year review of what we call the Plan of Conservation and Development, a guiding document for the town. It covers all different issues across the town. But those open spaces, the 2,000 plus acres, actually, there's probably more in the area of 2,500 to 2,600 or so as we speak right now. The acres themselves are something in the area of over 15%, if I'm not mistaken, not quite 20% of the, let's say, the geographic land area of Coventry. And I point out those numbers, not to get too tight on which number is exact, but the range, because Coventry has vocalized through public listening sessions and documents like this plan of conservation and development over the years to support the state of Connecticut statewide goals of protecting between 21 and say 24% of land and water resources across the entire state, with some split between actions that the state themselves can do for acquiring properties in their state forests, wildlife management areas, boat access areas, things like that. Some of you are very familiar with one major one we have in Coventry, Nathan Hale State Forest. The other half of that 21 to 24% statewide, the state would like to see the municipalities, private landowners, and entities like land trusts, community land trusts, and others work to conserve a portion, something like 11 to 12%, if I'm not mistaken. So I mention that because in Coventry, it's actually fairly well represented in the opportunities of a mix of different folks who have worked to protect and conserve open space lands and for the long term. And that means sometimes the town has acquired or purchased or received as gifts actual land in what we call fee simple, land that has the entire package of rights dedicated and provided to the town. And so we have several preserves and some town parks and some other areas that are considered dedicated or in fee simple open spaces. Then there's a large number of individual properties that are privately owned. Those owners over the years have decided and agreed to, and in some cases provided on their own through willing conservation easement agreements with the community, usually with the town of Coventry, something that's a device called a conservation easement agreement. And essentially we take away, or the landowner provides the opportunity to remove development rights on their property. They retain all the other rights of their property to do all kinds of other things. And the goal of this action is for the landowner and the receiver, in some cases the town of Coventry, to protect in perpetuity, and that's a key phrase there, in perpetuity, not just 5 years, 10 years, but long, long down the road, to protect the important resource values of that particular area. And Coventry has a mix of these properties, both conservation easements held privately, but retained by the town, and then also these fee simple open spaces. Now, the question you had about Conservation Commission, how do they look at this big town and do all this? There's a focus area at times that they work on, partly through their conservation and open space plan, which I think we've developed a few in our community over the couple decades. I think the most recent one is something in the area of done in 2014, and it was incorporated into our townwide guiding document, that plan of conservation and development, which was just issued a few years ago. That open space plan is really a good guiding document itself. It's an appendix. It shows where all these open spaces that are protected and conserved, where they're located, and acreage, and essentially who owns them, whether they have public access or not, whether we're doing certain kinds of things for the resource values. And then there's also a role of the Conservation Commission. It's actually one of the very few requirements that the state issued when they allowed towns to set up conservation commissions way back in the 60s. Conservation commissions are required to maintain an index of open space lands across their community. And these are lands that, again, are protected, but also ones that are unprotected, and sometimes larger unprotected private lands. So, for instance, golf courses or private sportsman clubs, rod and gun clubs, fish and game clubs, things like that, areas like those are supposed to be indexed and essentially kept on a running list. And it's not to necessarily say that all of those lands have to fall under some sort of a full control over the years by the town or others, but more for giving the community an opportunity to understand how much of the community is under land uses that we would consider conservation values. Sometimes those are recreational in part, and sometimes they're things like private woodlots, fishing access areas, a whole range of those kind of scenarios. That index, which we can talk about later on, is something that should be updated by the Conservation Commission periodically. And what that does is it gives another tool to town staff, private developers, abutting landowners, open space groups, and others to look at opportunities to maybe reach out to those landowners who have conservation lands, but they're privately held and they haven't done anything with them to protect them long term, and ask them what they think, what their family thinks about the values that they feel about those properties. Sometimes they will align with the goals of the town to perhaps work in partnership to protect them, which has a whole suite of tools that we can do or not do. And that's something that I'll mention later on. The partnership role is a very important piece that isn't often discussed a lot in this community, but the landowners who know a little bit about it, who want to do things with their property that involve somebody more than themselves to protect or conserve the lands, they reach out to the town periodically, including Conservation Commission, Land Use Office, the town council, the town manager, and open up some discussions about things that they'd like to see. Maybe it's part of a family legacy plan that they have. It could be a farmland. It could be a forest property. It could be a hayfield that was rented out for years to a local dairy farmer who's not in business anymore. And they're a little struggling with how do they take care of that hayfield because nobody's haying it anymore. Just as one little example. But these are things that are part of an ongoing set of discussions. Many of them happen kind of outside the public venues until landowners are willing to discuss them publicly. And for instance, there's a couple that are underway right now in our community. Landowners with a deep interest and passion for their own properties that they would like to permanently protect, and they're asking the town of Coventry to help participate in that vision. And we can talk a little bit about that later on if you're interested.
Well, yeah, I mean, we can. Right now, I was just thinking because the land that I'm on, basically, we have a lot of wetland, and the way some of the laws have changed just recently on the federal level, but also, who knows what's going to happen in the future with Connecticut, is like this should be preserved, and all it just takes is starting a conversation with the commission. Is that pretty much my understanding? What I just gathered that. I haven't done anything. I don't believe my wife has done anything over the years. I just need to reach out to you guys, basically.
Yes, certainly reaching out for a conversation that is non-binding and doesn't set you up for anything one way or another is a good idea. What I would suggest is you can start by reaching out perhaps to the land use office in town hall. And they'll have staff that can take on a phone call or email, or if you want to write a letter or ask for a sit-down appointment, and they'll assign some staff that would be appropriate to perhaps have a conversation. At that conversation, the reason I mentioned to town staff and not the Conservation Commission initially is that they may want to look at a map. They might want to kind of just see where's this property you're talking about, and then maybe share some ideas about whether there are other protected lands or other lands on the open space registry that are near your lands. And some of that nexus of those properties might enhance the value from the conservation aspect. Like your wetlands in your backyard, for instance, might be part of a larger wetland complex with other landowners, or it might be part of a stream belt that runs through a variety of properties and goes through some town open space properties before entering the river system. We have some of those that are focus areas in our community. And over time, there have been different landowners and the town and even the state of Connecticut that have partnered together to protect some of those lands with willing landowners And some of that individual landowners don't know about unless they communicate with their neighbors. So sometimes having a little discussion with town staff to begin with, and then maybe talking to Conservation Commission or others to look a little bit more at the value, maybe requesting a visit on their property, looking at some maps. There are a lot of things. And then if there's an interest that owner wants to continue with, usually staff will advise talking to legal and maybe some financial people to see whether or not you have financial considerations that should be planned for, if it's part of something you already have. Sometimes there are tax implications, many times actually beneficial tax implications, but that's something the town won't or the commission won't really address directly, but would strongly advise talking to tax people about that, or legal folks. And that's something that is broached on a regular basis, and landowners can even sometimes talk peer-to-peer with some other neighbors or community members who have been involved with this, and kind of hear peer-to-peer, how did this work for you? What should I be asking about? What should I watch out for? And those are things that I would strongly encourage people think about if they're talking about, how to protect their land or do something different. Maybe keep their land fully, but learn how to do well with the values you have, or maybe even enhancing forest habitat or grassland management, or recreational outdoor access to waterways or hunting areas or things like that.
So how does this wealth of, we have a high percentage, as you were saying, of how does this open land, this amount that we have in Coventry, benefit the community in not just trails, but is it helping with our air? Is it helping with everything that's going on with our climate nowadays? In a little bit, I know the climate is global and there are no borders when it comes to what we're dealing with. But what are the upsides of having a healthy and a good amount of open land and preservation in this community?
Coventry has, for decades and decades, up to present, articulated their interest in a vision that has in the past been described as things including rural character, or having the opportunity to support local agricultural produce and fiber and forest product productions for local uses, and a value of recreational outdoor activities, hiking, fishing, hunting, topics like that they find intertwined with how the community has developed over the last few centuries. And that effort is something that takes a lot of different kinds of people to get involved with. And efforts like yours, where you are reaching out with this podcast and having conversations in the community, is a good way to help, in some cases, reattach or connect people who may not feel connected to their community, to learn about these type of efforts across the community, conservation values, where things exist, why there are values. So, for instance, Conservation Commission and some of the subcommittees, like a former open space task force, even our protected spaces group today, we have the collective we over the years have offered public walks, public paddles, public talks, presentations about open space, conservation of resources, whether they're surface or groundwater. A lot of people are interested lately more and more with their individual wells, and whether or not drought management is something the community needs to be more involved with, because a large part of the community is completely dependent on groundwater sources for their potable water issues. The economic values are also another subset, a very important subset to many of us across the community, about why open space areas how do they compete, so to speak, or how do they enhance or maybe take away from economic issues in our community? And I will say that in the most recent townwide plan of conservation and development, one of the key pieces that the community looked at after they did a citizen survey and heard questions about things, including what you just brought up, about economic values and how do these properties and areas sit as far as driving the community forward or helping it to stabilize itself. We found a number of important and well-documented and supported research papers about economic benefits of conservation lands and open space lands. Ones that are very connected to here in Connecticut and here in communities like our town of Coventry. And the literature and the backing behind the literature is very supportive of economic benefits. You can look at things like the cost of community services, which is a whole series of repeated economic analyses of how certain kinds of land uses, residential land uses, commercial land uses, industrial land uses, farmland and conservation land use areas, how they impact economically the dollars, the tax dollars, the revenues, the balance of budgets in communities. And a very strong, very consistent message across many communities in Connecticut and New England show that agricultural conservation open space lands, whether they're protected or not, provide services well in excess to the revenues required to meet those services. So, for instance, conservation open space ag lands don't typically need a lot of fire, EMS, police, school, public safety services, don't need a lot of telecommunications, wastewater, phone services, road networks, bridges, culverts, things like that, where industrial, commercial, residential areas filled with school-age kids, running the school board of education budget, 70% of the town budget on an annual basis.
Yep.
These are things that are being looked at and consistently show that there is a major plus in economic benefits for conserving and protecting valuable conservation and open space lands as part of an economic plus for the community. And I think as we continue to bring that message out in the community and maybe periodically show that, with updated information here in our town, that can resonate strongly with people, whether you have a strong background and knowledge about land conservation, whether you think you're opposed to the community acquiring and protecting open space, or whether you're a big proponent of it. I think these parts of our communities will hear some of it and see these numbers and realize that there's strength there that will be favorable strength that we want to use as we move our community forward.
So taking these lands off the map for any kind of development actually is an upside, if I'm hearing this correctly. It and having a healthy amount of that in town, like a healthy ratio of that of open space, is a plus, even though some people might say, well, we can't develop that anymore. But is that correct?
So yes, I mean, I'm thinking about the people listening to this right now, and it's going to be a spectrum of people who are hearing that, and that's good because there's a spectrum of thoughts and ideas out there. What I say is, I don't think there are many people, including myself, who feel conserving or protecting, dedicating open space lands for in perpetuity is something that we should do for all undeveloped acreage in town. I don't think there are very many people who feel that way at all when you really come down to it. And I would be included in that. What I do feel is that we need to look at lands that are not developed or underdeveloped in our community now and strategically look at what resources they themselves have within their boundaries of those lands and how they connect to other lands and waters in our community, and then look at the resources on those lands. For instance, the forest and the woodlands, whether they're larger areas or if they're small fragmented ones. You made a little bit about climate change and air quality a little earlier. Strong documentation right here, right up the road at University of Connecticut, shown for decades that healthy forest lands, some of which require management by us humans, can provide peak cooling, peak carbon sequestration into the woody structures, which is a big element for climate adaptation and mitigation goals that most people are aware of now, and as well as providing habitat and outdoor recreational values and scenic landscapes, things like that. That's just one example. So the strategic look at those resources and where those fit on the land and where they fit on properties and where those properties adjoin other properties. This is the kind of focus that Conservation Commission, other land use agencies in this community, and even stewards like us, Protected Spaces Stewardship Committee, this is what we are kind of working with all the time in our head. And we invite and we participate with landowners across the community regularly to talk about these things. And I think over time, as we, and I'll say again, collectively, we open up more dialogue and have strong community conversations, we will see that I believe more of the community will continue support the acreage that we have in this community that is protected, and look at some of the other acreage in town, some of which is perfectly available and preferable for various development needs. That's what our plan of conservation and development in town specifically points out: areas of important planning needs for development purposes, residential, mixed residential, commercial, even some industrial areas, where we should have road networks enhanced or supported, where we might look at recreational, public safety, wastewater treatment scenarios. These are all very important parts of our community. Conservation and open space are other important pieces. They could be connected to schools. They could be connected to our park system. We are finding right now, as we are working as a committee to develop and even enhance some trails, recreational trails that have been in our community now for a few decades. These are trails that are part of what we call open space subdivisions, residential developments across the town, where they have actually built in, as part of the development process proposed by the developers, to have community open spaces run through these properties, these development areas. And people are paying premium real estate prices to move into these communities because they recognize the value of well-maintained recreational access within steps of their doors of their community, or within 5-minute walk or a 5 to 10-minute bike ride of their home that they have probably the most important investment of their life wrapped up in. And this is something that is, we've seen probably now over 25 years, a continuing affirmation that these kind of residential developments are important. And where new ones are proposed, or even new commercial areas are being developed or enhanced, people are asking, how do they get connected? And not necessarily by traditional vehicles on paved roadway systems, but on bike rails or bike trails, some of which could even be non-vehicle ones, but walkways. We have a concept of something called the Nathan Hale Greenway, running from Bolton Notch through Willimantic, essentially along the Hop River system. And Coventry, Bolton, Andover have been talking and working individually in their towns to developing a low-impact, small passageway, essentially an outdoor recreational walkway through those communities. Other places have looked at converting things like the old railway system, including the rail lines that run along the Hop River in Bolton, Coventry, Andover, Columbia, Willimantic. It's now known as the Hop River State Park Trail, a very popular, highly enjoyed 4-season recreational opportunity that touches and connects with Coventry in a few different areas. And that is much more of an active, managed, paved, signed corridor for people moving across the community. That doesn't mean we should be doing it everywhere in the community, but in some select places where it makes sense, where you want to be able to go somewhere without hopping in your car and driving 5 minutes, but getting on your bike, getting some physical exercise, traveling through a scenic area. These are options that the community has asked for and supported over the years, and I think that will continue over the years.
So seeing there is support in the community and the community asks for this kind of development, and the budget is fresh in my mind, and I'm still recovering from that entire referendum and everything. What is the cost to the town? Is this something that really is worth every dollar that is spent? If there is even a big cost at all, but is it worth it? I mean, you've talked about it before, and I don't know if I'm rehashing something, but I just wanted to clarify that people are like, always looking at the bottom line. So
Yeah,
do we
so
get a big bang for our buck for how we approach open spaces in Coventry?
I think absolutely the community gets a very big bang, several bangs for the buck for the investments that the community itself puts in or leverages from
Mhm.
other financial resources, including state grants, which again, all of us as taxpayers throughout our communities in Coventry, we pay into state taxes that then in some cases turn out to be grants that are on a competitive basis awarded for community and statewide priorities. So we do support these things, and overwhelmingly, the number of dollars that come in, if you're looking purely from the cost on a dollar aspect, um, we often will find that the acquisition of properties, let's say what I called earlier that phrase, the fee simple properties, where the community, the town owns the whole bundle of rights around the property, something like the Williams Preserve that we have off of Cooper Lane behind the high school complex. We actually got that property, we the town, a combination of different things. The Williams family actually essentially provided that property almost at what we would consider a bargain sale. They gave us a price break on their property because they found it to be a family heirloom legacy property that some of the living members really wanted to conserve and be able to have the community continue to use it. And they weren't able to do that themselves anymore. So they provided some price break, which is very valuable. The community itself put in their own dollars through a open space budget, so to speak. It's a small budget we have in town, but we have a small amount of money for that. We also then applied as a town for State of Connecticut Open Space Acquisition Grant, which we were very happy to be able to receive because it's a very competitive program. This
Mhm.
is across 169 communities across the state. Coventry is one of those communities. And we were able to get a grant for this Williams Preserve. And we were able to work with our regional land trust in the area, known as the Joshua's Trust, who found it very valuable to support Coventry's own initiative on that property because, in part, it was sitting next to an existing Joshua's Trust land preserve that was donated to the trust years before by a Coventry resident, Elizabeth Couch. It's now known as the Elizabeth Couch Preserve. And we thought, you know what? Not only could we benefit from some of their additional dollars so that we have now a basket of multiple funding supporters for this acquisition, but we also looked at the management and the stewardship of both of these properties, the Williams property, as we call it now, and the next door trust property, the Couch Preserve. How are we going to manage and steward these? And we actually have an informal relationship now where we share some of our stewardship work. We've even developed a trail that connects the two properties through our own Town property. And this is an example where individual efforts may not have gotten to those plus results, but the combination of financial, sometimes legal, sometimes pro bono surveying work, as well as bargain sales and other kinds of donations and gifts, certainly give, I think, in almost every case I can come up with in my head right now, where we had a net plus that the community is benefiting from acquiring that property, then as opposed to us purchasing it directly at fair market value and then having to spend town resources to maintain it over the years, a legitimate concern, hopefully by most people in the community. And we have a limited resource pool of professional staff and equipment and time to do that with our other resources in town, like playgrounds and other town facilities, which is why the town council 10 years ago now found the value and responded to community members who wanted to see better stewardship of these open space and conservation lands. And so they created the Protected Spaces Stewardship Committee.
Mm-hmm.
Have an appointment of 5 members. And what we do is we work with training and coordinating a community of volunteers. We have about 20 to 30 community volunteers right now, along with us on the committee. And we go out and we take care of and inspect and monitor and enhance these open spaces and trails. We have about 10 or 12 of them right now in the town on a 4-season basis. And we do that on a volunteer basis with a very small amount of funding that comes through the Conservation Commission on an annual basis. We basically request money for small pieces of tools, equipment, sometimes construction materials to build a simple bridge over a wet spot of a trail. Sometimes it's a bigger project. We just built a footbridge over a perennial or temporary stream over a brook in the Williams Preserve that we just completed last month. We've looked at supporting pollinating habitat for pollinating fields and hay fields that the town owns, which will help reduce cutting time, gas, equipment, staff time cutting grasses on a regular seasonal basis, and supporting pollinating habitats, bees, bugs, bats that are looking for wildlife habitat flowering and larval food habitat during the growing season, and providing some nice landscape beauty that people are asking more and more for and looking for, not only in their backyards, but for properties like Creaser Park and Thornton Brook Preserve and the Williams Preserve and other areas like that. So again, I think there are reasons why sometimes properties may not, even if they're offered to the town, may not be in the best interest for the town to acquire, but that doesn't mean the value is not there. And maybe we can redirect them to other resources or other ways that they can do something on their own lands with their own resources, or maybe enhanced by looking for technical assistance from UConn or supporting networks from a group called the Eastern Connecticut Forest Landowners Association, a wonderful group, private forest landowners who talk to each other. They go out in the woods, they chat about stuff that is important to them. They talk about how to best manage their own properties. These are things that we're trying to connect people to, and you can pick and choose, almost like going to a restaurant and pulling off of a menu. What is it that works for you? What do you like? What can you afford? What do you want to do with it? And I hope that conservation and open space groups in our town for the years to come will be in that position to support people who are looking for that menu.
So one thing to make sure somebody listens to this and they get really like, okay, I want to volunteer. This is something I want to do. First, send me some links so I can put them in the show notes. But I guess to be as direct as possible, should they just reach out to the Conservation Commission in Coventry on the Town Hall page and just send an email to if they want to get involved? Is that the simplest, most direct way?
I think they can certainly do that.
Okay.
I will give you, not to circumvent the Conservation Commission, I'm not sure if they have a dedicated email address on their own web page of the town. Mm-hmm. If I'm wrong, I'll correct that later on. I will say that our Protected Spaces Committee, which again is part of the Conservation Commission, we do have an email address, and we've been posting it at trailhead kiosks around town. We've been putting it in the town newsletter. We've been advertising it when people are looking to reach out about issues you're just talking about now. So I'll send you the link, but for those that want to hear it, it's Open Space Stewardship at coventry-ct.gov. And that's the address that will go to a town email account, and then it gets directed to people who can look at that and then send it to the appropriate people. It might be the town planner, it might be the town manager, it might be an opportunity to send back a notice when the Conservation Commission holds their next meeting. They tend to meet the first Wednesdays of each month at 7:00 in Town Hall, always open to the public. So people can just show up at those meetings, or you can try to reach out to people in advance and say, I'd like to ask about such and such. So there are those opportunities.
And all this only gets done if there's volunteers. Is that correct?
So the things I've talked about, the volunteers are a critical part of it. I have
Yeah.
to give a high hat and big kudos to our town staff. We have tremendous staff at a lot of different
Okay.
levels. Some of them are at the land use office, and then also in cooperation and strong coordination with folks like on the boots on the ground folks in public works, boots on the ground folks in parks and recreation, talking with regulatory agencies like the Inland Wetlands Agency in town, talking with Planning and Zoning Commission in town. There are a variety of reasons that we can hear when people talk about things, when they raise an issue of concern they've seen out there. Um, Sometimes people think of the conservation or open space groups, and that's great. And if it's something we can handle, we'll do that. And if not, we direct that to the folks that should be doing that, or we ask for their professional guidance on what can be done. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on out there. And sometimes that can be overwhelming for somebody like, say, listening to the show. Where do I start?
Mm-hmm.
But feel free that, in fact, we just got some comments from an email the last 2 days about 2 different properties in town that we are trying as a community to try to enhance and open up a trail system for people to use. And we just haven't had the resources for it yet. Volunteers are interested, but we need a little bit more to get it going. And we didn't want to lose those local neighbors who helped advocate for those properties. So they actually just contacted us wanting to know what's going on. So we're going to have a meeting and see if we can kind of jumpstart. And you're right, it comes down to some of the volunteers. When we can do our work in coordination with the professional staff and the permitting where it's required, we definitely do that. And for instance, right now, we have a big focus on aquatic invasive plants in one of those 3 ponds, not Coventry Lake, but the other one, Eagleville Lake. We have a big explosion of an invasive plant that is right now requiring sole volunteer efforts to go out and individually pull. And we actively manage the pull plants for an upland disposal site. I've got what we call pulling parties of groups of folks who come out in kayaks and canoes on a coordinated day. We're collecting plants after they're being trained to do so, and we're disposing them in a proper location upland. And this is part of a management plan actually written by the towns of Mansfield and Coventry to control that high recreational value pond there, Eagleville Lake. And it basically is focusing on all volunteer work. So in that case, yes, volunteers are the bread and butter of that effort. In some cases, we use the town staff, for instance, writing grants and administering funding or helping us work on any kind of permitting issues for things like that effort.
So I guess I've had you on for almost an hour. So I guess one thing with all this wealth of information and events like the polling party and other events, how would someone be able to find that? Is there one resource, like one calendar that they can go to, or is there a number of Facebook pages they can join? How would they, okay, I might not be able to sign on for a committee, but I want to go to a polling party, and
Yep.
this is going on throughout the year. So
Yep.
before we started recording, you were talking about you have some events coming up, which I might not get this out in time, but
Right.
how do you find a calendar of things to go to?
So there are a couple things, and there's no one answer at this point because we're
Okay.
not quite sure if that really would work. What I will say is I strongly encourage everybody listening. If you haven't already, you should be looking for the town newsletter that comes out to all our mailboxes across the town a few times a year. When we can get program events listed on appropriate timing to fit into the delivery of those are usually listed for about 3 or so months at a time, events or programs. Sometimes they're part of the park and recreation catalog or that you'll see of parks and recreation programs, and sometimes they'll sit as individual write-ups in the town newsletter. But that's a very important printed document that you can hold on to, keep it on your calendar or your refrigerator or wherever you keep it if you want a print copy of that. In addition, the town manager for Coventry also has a Facebook page, and they regularly put out notices, as hopefully a lot of you know and you subscribe to. It's free on all kinds of issues. And when we can catch a monthly update that they put out, obviously on a monthly basis, we will drop in program events with small details of who, what, where wins. And those are listed on the Facebook page through the Town of Coventry Managers Facebook page. Lastly, what I would say is our protected spaces does work with the Conservation Commission, and we have a Facebook page, and I'll send you the link that anybody can join. You just have to request it to join for it. We really look for the community members who live here or recreate or have businesses here. They're the ones that would find the most value of that page, because it will list activities, events, volunteer requests for efforts, as well as highlight things, seasonal efforts that are happening along open spaces, conservation lands, and trails across Coventry. So there are a variety of opportunities to do that. And what I've also learned is, and last thing I'll mention is these walks and talks and paddles that we offer, they show up at different times of the year. And we usually get a few new people each time at those. And we find that they go back and they talk to their neighbors and their family and their friends, and they'll bring them to another walk. They didn't realize that this park existed somewhere. They didn't know about this preserve or this trail, or they don't feel comfortable going out and exploring these on their own, especially if they have kids or they're older, or they're just not, they're moving into Coventry and they're just not comfortable yet with the kind of semi-rural character that we have here with our woodlands and fields. And they want to know, they want to explore, but they want to go out with somebody who's knowledgeable and in a safe environment. Those are the things that we're offering, and we do, and we try to list them in those programs. So I hope there's a little bit there that people are hearing today that they can join in on, and we'll look forward to seeing you out there, in the coming weeks and months.
So, Eric, thank you for the wealth of information on this. This flew by. I think we could probably talk for another hour, so we'll have to have you come back on. I got a lot more education just from this first hour, so we'll get even deeper into the conversation of like how to preserve the lands that we have in this big town, one of the biggest towns in Connecticut. I really appreciate the time. Thank you for coming on and just giving us all this information.
Okay, thank you, Francis. Appreciate it.
Have a good day. I'll talk to you later.